What is going on, Chess YouTube? So for today's video, we're looking at a beautiful game played between the American Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura and the Norwegian Grandmaster Magnus Carlsen from the 2020 Lindora's Abbey Chess Tournament Finals. And here we go. In the game, Hikaru Nakamura opens 1e4, Magnus goes e5, then we have knight to f3, knight to c6, and of course here the two main lines are bishop c4, the Italian opening, and bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez. And in this game, Hikaru does go bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez opening. Now, lately, in this position, Magnus has played quite a bit of the move a6, heading for his favorite martial attack, but instead, in today's game, he does go knight to f6, the dreaded Berlin defense. Now, of course, black is putting pressure on that pawn on e4. The two main lines are short castles and d3 defending the pawn. And in today's game, Hikaru does go d3, supporting the pawn, and Magnus, of course, plays the main line, bishop c5, developing the bishop to a very strong square, setting up d6, castles, and so on. All right, now here on move 5, Hikaru has many different choices to choose from. For example, short castles is playable, c3 is very strong, you can go knight d2, you can go bishop a4, a favorite of Magnus himself, and of course, there is the final line, bishop takes c6, which was played by Hikaru in the game. Now, what is the point of this move? You are giving up that light squared bishop, but in return, you do get to damage black's pawn structure on the queen side. Now here, Magnus does recapture with the d-pawn, that is the strongest line, the main line, d takes c6, and now we have a very interesting, very imbalanced middle game on our hands. Of course, black has those two b's, the b's on c8 and c5. That bishop pair will be a very strong asset throughout this game, but of course, to get that, white did damage black's pawn structure, and that means white can play against the very awkward pawn structure of black. And that means white will have quite a bit of play as well in this position. All right, here, Hikaru. He starts with the main line, short castles, casting his king to safety, and here Magnus has a million different lines to choose from. There's knight d7, that is perhaps the main line, maybe the most solid option. Beyond that, you can go bishop d6, queen d7, bishop g4, and so on. And today, in this game, Magnus played maybe the most enterprising move, that is the move bishop g4. Now, g4 is a very active square for this bishop. It is pinning the knight on f3 to the queen on d1, and beyond that, black is setting up, say, queen e7 and long castles ideas. That would be a very aggressive attacking setup for black. Now, the drawback of this move, Hikaru spots it immediately. He just goes h3, putting the question to the bishop. Now here, bishop h5 is virtually forced. If you trade on f3, you are giving up the bishop pair for almost nothing. After bishop takes, then queen takes, white has the better pawn structure. Both sides have one bishop, and overall, white would have a very pleasant advantage throughout the game. So instead here, bishop h5 is virtually forced. And now here, white has the option of going g4, driving back that bishop. And if black goes bishop g6, then that bishop will be basically entombed forever on the king side. It's biting on granite on e4. It would have very little in terms of long-term activity prospects. And here, Hikaru, sure enough, he does go g4, putting the question to the bishop. Now here, it turns out bishop g6 is very, very weak. White just takes on e5. White wins a pawn and has an excellent game. Therefore, here, the only good move for black, and the move played in the game, sure enough, is the move knight takes g4. Now, personally, I think when Magnus played the move 6 bishop g4 earlier in the game, he was intending to follow up knight g4 if Hikaru went for this line. So, knight takes g4, then h takes, then bishop takes, and let's slow down and do inventory. All right, here, Magnus, he still has the bishop pair, those b's on g4 and c5, but beyond that, he just gave up his knight to get a vicious attack against the white king. Now, of course, here, black, his plan is simple. Queen d7, long castles, and then launching those pawns down the board on the king side, creating an attack. And meanwhile, white, his plan is simple as well. He has to find a way to develop those queen side pieces as quickly as possible, defend the king side, and stabilize with the extra piece. So it's almost like a martial attack here, where if white can develop the queen side and stabilize, he will be doing excellent. But meanwhile, black is going to have a very dangerous attack on the king side. All right, here Hikaru, he starts bishop b3, the strongest move, challenging immediately that very strong bishop on c5. Now here, black, he needs to keep that bishop alive. If he trades on e3, white goes f takes e3, he opens up the f file, and believe it or not, white would be doing just fine there. Therefore, bishop e7 is virtually forced. All right, now here, in this position, Hikaru, he's got to find the right follow-up. It's very, very important to find the right placement for the king. It turns out the right sequence here is king g2, supporting the knight on f3, intending queen to e1, stepping out of the pin, and then threatening knight takes e5. So overall, king g2 is the strongest move here for white. Instead of that here, white goes king to h1, sliding the king over, perhaps intending rook g1, but as you can see by the eval bar on your left just collapsing, let's take one more look at that. Right here, the eval bar utterly collapsing after king to h1. Here, white's position is just terrible, and black is going to get a massive attack right away. All right, Magnus, he continues f5, a very strong move, putting pressure on that pawn on e4 immediately. Now, white follows up, rook g1, the logical follow-up. Now, of course, if black goes, say, f takes e4 or f4, that would remove the defense of the bishop on g4. Then the rook could capture it, winning that piece. So here, black's going to have to find something else. And in the game, he does find a different move. That is the move h5, further bolstering the bishop on g4 with the pawns. Now the bishop is essentially entombed on g4 forever. It has no good retreat squares. The pawns on f5 and h5 are occupying those good retreat squares. But overall here, black is going to be doing excellent. He has very good attacking chances. All right, again, it turns out the right way forward for white is admitting your own failure and going king to g2, trying to re-centralize the king. But, of course, Hikaru, he's not going to want to do that. Instead, he continues knight to c3, developing the knight. But now here, black, he continues f4 again. The bishop on g4 being supported by the pawn. Therefore, f4 does make a lot of sense. And now we have sort of a King's Indian-style pawn structure on the king's side. Black may want to go, say, bishop e6 in the future, then g5, g4, and so on, getting that King's Indian-style pawn storm going on the king's side. All right, now, bishop d2 is the move, the only good retreat square for the bishop. And now, sure enough, black does go g5, that pawn being sufficiently defended by the bishop and the queen on e7 and d8. All right, now, here, Hikaru has got to find some way to get his pieces back into the game, and he finds a very interesting way to regroup. He starts knight to b1, retreating the knight. Frankly, a very Magnus Carlsen style move. And what is the idea? It's very simple. He wants to go bishop c3, exerting pressure on the long diagonal on the rook on h8 via the x-ray attack and the pawn on e5, and then go knight bd2, supporting his other knight on f3. That would be the optimal placement of these minor pieces, but the drawback is the plan is very slow, and here Magnus has a million different ways to proceed to continue the attack. For example, right here, one idea is simply bishop takes f3, giving up the bishop for the knight. The point being, after queen takes, you can go g5 immediately, again crashing through. If I was playing as Magnus, I would be very tempted to play that plan right here. Beyond that, you can also go queen d7 or queen d6, intending long castles. Now, instead of those in the game here, Magnus, he did go bishop c5. That is a very active square for the bishop. Now, the point being, earlier in the game, black did go bishop e7 as the white bishop was on e3. But now, with the bishop on d2 and the pawn controlling e3 permanently, c5 is once again a very dangerous square for that bishop. And now it is pressuring f2. White will have to defend. What's it going to do? Well, it turns out Hikaru is in no mood for defense. He goes on offense. He ignores the pawn on the f2 square, and instead he does go bishop c3, pressuring e5 with the bishop. All right, now here Magnus, he can defend. For example, queen d7 is perfectly playable. And again, you can go bishop takes f3, again intending g5 as the follow-up. Now, instead here, he does go bishop takes f2, winning that pawn and pressuring the rook on g1. Not a bad move at all. Here, Hikaru, what's he going to do? Well, it turns out moving the rook is actually a terrible idea. For example, if you go rook to f1 trying to defend, black can go bishop to g3, and with those two bishops on g3 and g4, I mean, I have never seen an attacking setup quite like that in a game. That would be just insanely dangerous. Now, instead of that here, Hikaru finds the best move. That is just giving off the exchange on g1. He actually goes knight bd2, allowing black to capture on g1, but it turns out that would actually not be the right way forward. Now here, what are black's options? Once again, you can go queen d7, intending long castles. I quite like that idea. Beyond that, you can actually trade on f3 and then trade on g1. It turns out that is a strong sequence as well. Now, in the game, queen d7 was played. Here, Magnus is finally setting up the idea of long castles. You gotta love it. And now here, Hikaru, he goes queen to f1, sliding out of the pin of the knight on f3. That bishop no longer pinning that knight to the queen on d1. Now, here Magnus, he does trade on g1, bishop takes g1. After all, that bishop was being attacked by the queen. You do have to move, so bishop takes g1 played, then queen takes, and then we have bishop takes and knight takes. All right, now here, black has some options. You can continue g4, the standard King's Indian style move, getting those pawns rolling down the board, but also rook g8, it turns out, is quite playable as well. Now, in the game, Carlsen did go g4, pushing that pawn down the board. Now we have knight takes e5. Of course, that pawn on e5 was hanging, therefore white can take it. And now we have rook g8, sliding out of the attack of the X-ray attack of the bishop on c3, so a very prudent move by Carlsen. Now we have rook f1. Finally, that rook on the a-file is getting back into the game. It is pressuring f4. What is Magnus going to do about it? Well, he goes simply queen g5, supporting that pawn with the queen. And now, you know, this is a good time to slow down and take inventory. What is the material balance here? Well, it turns out white has the 2 minor pieces versus the rook and 2 extra pawns of black. That means black is up roughly a pawn in terms of like relative material balance, but more importantly here, black's king is very safe either in the center or on the queen side. Meanwhile, white's king on h1 is going to be very, very vulnerable, and black has the 3 passed pawns on the king side that are ready to march down the board. So overall, you got to like black here a lot more than white. All right, here, Hikaru, he continues queen d4, centralizing the queen, a very important move, cutting off d8, therefore stopping long castles. Magnus being punished a little bit for waiting so long to castle his king. Now here, Magnus, queen to h4, hits the king g1, queen g3, king to h1, and now, of course, if Magnus wants it, he can just go for the draw by repetition, sliding his queen back and forth, and the king will have no choice but to go back and forth as well. What is Carlsen going to do? He starts queen to h3, king g1, and now here, black has many different options. The strongest way to continue is simply rook d8, either immediately or after one more series of checks, queen g3, king h1, and then rook d8. Either way, rook d8 is the key idea. You have to get your rook into the game on d8, pressuring the queen. Now, instead of that here, Magnus, he goes g3, and this move turns out to be a critical mistake. What is the problem with this move? It's very simple. Hikaru Nakamura, he just jumps back with the knight to f3, and now look at this. The pawns on the king side are completely blockaded. There's no way to push the f-pawn. The knight is super strong on f3, and with one small strategic mistake, Magnus Carlsen, he throws away almost his entire advantage here. All right, now, here, Carlsen, g2, pushing the pawn down the board, threatening queen to h1 ideas. This is very dangerous, but now Hikaru simply rook d1, sliding the rook out of the attack, and now if queen h1, king to f2, and again, Hikaru is doing just fine. Everything will be defended. All right, now, here, in this position, the computer says b6 is the best move, kind of a weird move, kind of preemptively defending a7. But instead here, Magnus, he goes queen takes f3, winning the knight on f3. The problem with this move is white is going to get a vicious attack. I mean, this move deserves at least one question mark here. All right, now, queen e5, flying in with the queen is Hikaru Nakamura. Now we have king d8. The king is officially stranded in the center, and his rook on a8 is effectively out of the game. So therefore, Magnus, despite being up material here, it's almost as if Hikaru Nakamura is the one up material. It's kind of like a power play in NHL hockey. That rook is just out of the game. All right, now, queen to f6 hits the king e8, bishop b4. The audacity of Hikaru Nakamura threatening checkmate in one move, queen to e7. What is Magnus going to do about it? He starts c5, then bishop takes c5, and here Magnus, I mean, you know your position is bad when the computer recommends queen to f1, suiciding the queen just to delay the checkmate. Things are getting that bad for the former world champion. All right, now, king d7 is the move. But now, here, Hikaru, he plays one final move, queen to f7, hitting the king. And in this position, Magnus Carlsen resigned on the spot to Hikaru Nakamura. And here's why. If you go back, king d8, then simply queen takes g8, ends the game on the spot. And instead, if you go king to c6, I do want to show you the fastest mate. It is a beautiful one. Queen e6, king b5, a4 hits the king to a5, b4 hits the king again and forces king takes a4. The king takes the pawn, then rook a1, king b5, and the final move would be c4, checkmating black. Therefore, way back in this position right here, Magnus Carlsen did resign on the spot to Hikaru Nakamura. Wow, what a game between Magnus the GOAT and Hikaru from the 2020, what is the name of this tournament? The Lindora's Abbey Finals on the chess24.com servers. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button and let me know down below what you think of the ongoing Magnus Carlsen drama at the 2024 World Rapid Championships. Personally, I think Magnus is in the wrong. What happened is Magnus objectively had a very bad day one and bad day two, a bad start to the tournament. He was wearing jeans on day two. The tournament organizers, the chief arbiter, basically had a dress code violation for Magnus. Magnus broke the dress code. He was forced to sit out in one of his games. He was offered to come back in day number 3. He was given that chance. Magnus declined to do it. He just voluntarily withdrew from the tournament. And it seems like everyone on Twitter is jumping to the defense of Magnus Carlsen. All the same people who jumped to his defense immediately when he accused Hans Niemann of cheating in the 2022 Sinquefield Cup. Personally, I thought that was outrageous. So many people supporting him for that. And once again, they are supporting Magnus in this scenario. It seems like the army of Magnus supporters is out there on Twitter. Of course, Levy Rosman is doing it and everyone else. But no one's mentioning the fact that he had a bad day 1, a bad day 2. He was offered to come back on day 3, and he just quit the tournament. I mean, you know, it's not like this is the first time Magnus got smoked in the first part of a tournament and then just abruptly quit. It's happened before. He's doing it again. Personally, I think this is a kind of a disgrace by Magnus. That is my personal opinion. I mean, I think his ego got hurt, and he just doesn't want to play in a tournament that he can't win, which is really sad. That is the definition of a sore loser, right? So that is my opinion. I think Magnus is totally in the wrong in this scenario. I guess people defending him, like Gotham Chess, are saying it's just a coincidence that the one tournament he has where he has a very, very, very bad start, he also happens to, give himself a dress code violation by violating the dress code, and then he happens to use that as an excuse to leave the tournament. I mean, I think this has nothing to do with that. There's also the whole, freestyle chess drama situation, so I think this is just Magnus being a sore loser and being angry at FIDE for the whole freestyle chess drama, and, this is just his excuse to get out of the tournament after he had a very bad day 1 and bad day 2. But that is just my opinion. I'm fully aware literally all of the chess.com sponsored people will agree with Magnus, as they always do, regardless of the, what's actually happening. But that is my opinion. So let me know down below what you think of the ongoing drama. And while you're at it, check out this video right here, where Magnus Carlsen plays a beautiful game against Hikaru Nakamura. If you want to see more Magnus versus Hikaru action, check that game out, and I'll see you in the next video.